Welcome to the lecture for Module 12. We've spent the last three modules, 9, 10, and 11, really focusing in great depth on child abuse and neglect, child protective services, the statewide central register, commonly referred to as the child abuse hotline in our state, how the criminal court and family court respond to child abuse and neglect, and a bit about mandated reporters of child abuse and neglect. So that's three modules on that topic. Well, now we're changing topics. We're going to move on to elder abuse. So in this lecture, we're going to talk about what an elder is, how old is an elder or senior citizen, the population of senior citizens in our country right now and why it matters. We'll go over 6 types of elder abuse, 2 serious problems elders are dealing with that we don't talk about nearly enough, and some theories about why elder abuse occurs. And you should see a lot of similarities between topics we're covering elder abuse and topics we've covered in intimate partner violence and even in child abuse and neglect, especially when we talk about the types of abuse and theories as to what causes elder abuse. However, there's some very unique things to consider about elder abuse, especially in New York State, so I'm going to bring those to your attention. We'll start by talking about what is an elder or a senior citizen. Well, it depends on who you ask. Researchers, public service agencies, textbooks, everybody can disagree on this, right? We don't have like a legal definition of what it means to be an elder. While you may need to be one age to qualify for Social Security or your pension, you may need to be a different age to qualify for some other type of service. So whatever you're researching, whatever article you're reading, if you're trying to find services for a client or for a family member or friend, just make sure you do a little research and figure out what is the age that's applicable for that particular research or agency. Well, generally speaking, and for the purposes of our course, an elder, a senior, or a senior citizen is a person age 60 or older. So that's generally going to be what we use, is age 60 and older. And when elders are mistreated, the most commonly used term is elder abuse. It would certainly be correct to say senior citizen abuse. That's absolutely correct. But the term you most generally hear is elder abuse. Let's talk a bit about the generations. We know every generation, covering a span of about 20 years, is given a name, right? We need to name everything. So the people who are the oldest in our society right now were those born during the silent generation. These folks were born between 1928, right before the Great Depression, and the last of this generation was born at the end of World War II. These folks are now 77 up to 94 years old, so depending on how old you are, these folks may be your grandparents, your great-grandparents, okay? Baby boomers. These guys are in bold for a reason. When people say, whatever boomer, this is who they're talking about, right? Baby boomers. That's where that expression comes from. They were born between 1946 and 1964, so they right now are age 58 to 76. So a large proportion of the baby boomers are still in the workforce, and yet an awful lot of them are also retired and taking money from their pensions or from Social Security and are no longer working. So the baby boomers cover quite a range of people aged 58 to 76. Generation X are those born between 65 to 1980. Right now they're aged 42 to 57, so these folks are largely still in the workforce. Generation Y are those folks born between 1981 and 1996. They have a lot in common with Generation Z, who were born 1997 to 2010. When people say millennials, I haven't seen a great definition of a millennial. They're generally referring to people born in the end of Generation Y, toward the year 2000, or more specifically to Generation Z. So millennials could be accurately applied to both of those. And Generation Alpha are our youngest members of our society right now. They are age day 1 up until age 11. So why were the baby boomers in bold in that chart? Why are we pulling them out for special attention? Well, it's because of this. And these numbers may not be easy to see on your screen right now, but you don't even really need to see them. Really, all you need to focus on is this blue line. This chart starts in 1940, and this is the baby boom. This is when the number of births in the United States grew faster than it ever had before. So this is the largest boom in population in U.S. history. And it started right at the end of World War II, 1946, and goes up through 1964. And then you can see here, it starts to decline steadily down to 1980. And then with a couple of exceptions, it stayed way down here. So this was absolutely a enormous growth population. So why does that matter, and what does that have to do with elder abuse? Well, the population of our elders has grown dramatically as these people have aged. So consider this. In the year 2000, there were 2.4 million, roughly, seniors in New York State. So we're just talking about New York State right now. 2.4 million seniors in the year 2000. In just 20 years' time, the number of seniors in New York State, 3.1 million, and in 2030, it's predicted to be 4 million. Well, who are these people? Well, these are the baby boomers aging, right? These are people right now in their 50s who are soon to be in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And because there's so many of them, the population of our senior in this state and throughout the country is just getting larger right now. Why is that important? Well, because in any issue we talk about seniors, we always have to recognize just how many of them there are. So if there's any problem affecting the seniors right now, it is a huge problem because there are so many of them. And there will only be more, right? So in 2030, it's predicted in New York State, we will have 4 million people who qualify to be termed elder or senior. Let's get into 6 different types of elder abuse. And again, you're going to hear a lot of commonalities, but things we've discussed in intimate partner violence and even in child abuse and neglect. But there's a couple things that are really specific to seniors. So first, we're going to talk about physical abuse, emotional and sexual abuse, neglect, substandard living conditions, and financial exploitation. You can bet that's a big one for seniors that doesn't apply to children. And then we're going to talk about 2 serious problems that elders are facing that we don't talk enough about and that can be related to abuse or neglect of elders. How much elder abuse is there? Here's a quick pop quiz question for you. How many seniors are subject to at least one type of abuse in the U.S. every year? How many seniors are subject to at least one type of abuse in the U.S., the entire country, every year? The estimates are about 5 million. Of course, we can't give you an exact number of this because so many acts of elder abuse, like other types of abuse, go unreported. But it's been estimated by research the number's about 5 million. So every year, 5 million senior citizens have some type of abuse afflicted upon them. So what does that mean for New York State? That's about 260,000 elders in New York State who have some sort of abuse inflicted upon them every single year. This is an aerial shot of Buffalo, New York that has a population of about 260,000. So when you look at this picture, I just want you to think about every building and every house that you see in this picture being filled with people. And that's how many elders are abused just in New York State every single year. That is an extraordinarily high number. And you know what? As we know from our studies of intimate partner violence, the number's probably higher, right? Physical abuse, we all know what physical abuse is, but who can be a perpetrator? Well, it could be a family member, it could be a son or daughter of the elderly person, it could be a spouse of the elderly person, it could be a grandchild, but it could also be paid caregivers, and that's one of the areas in which elder abuse becomes very different from intimate partner violence and from child abuse and neglect, because now we're talking about nurses, nurses' aides, LPNs, all different sorts of service providers who are also in a position to abuse an elder. So every time we talk about any type of abuse inflicted upon an elder, we have to remember it doesn't just include family members. Don't forget it includes people who are paid to care for that person. And we all know what physical abuse is. It could include many things, just including pushing, hitting, slapping, pinching, shaking, all the things we know about physical abuse. So that's just one type. Emotional or psychological abuse. Both family members, spouses, and caregivers are certainly capable of inflicting emotional or psychological abuse on an elder. We know this could include threats, intimidation, harassment, verbal abuse, constant name calling, humiliation, screaming, or gaslighting. And you'll remember we talked about gaslighting in terms of intimate partner violence, where somebody actually questions your version of reality. So they're constantly, if you say, it's cold, it's not cold out. My head hurts. Your head doesn't hurt, you're fine, right? Constantly contradicting somebody's statement about their own reality and questioning their sanity. It's the kind of thing that makes you feel like you're going crazy. Sexual abuse, this is an area of elder abuse we don't talk about nearly enough because the incidence of it is quite high. Again, of course, these can be family members and also paid caregivers. Elderly people can be extremely vulnerable to sexual abuse and are one of the groups that are least likely to report it. Of course, examples could include outright rape, sexual assault, also unwanted touching, and forced nakedness. What is forced nakedness? Forced nakedness could be like a paid caregiver is supposed to change an adult's undergarments and then put them in a nightgown or robe and put them back in bed, and they just go, forget it, you can just be naked. And that person doesn't want to be naked, but they can't clothe or dress themselves, right? So it's like forcing an elderly person to be naked who doesn't want to be naked, and also exposing them to other people that don't need to see them naked, right? It's a very uncomfortable and embarrassing thing to be naked when you don't want to be, especially when you don't have the physical strength to clothe or dress yourself. So that would fall under the category of sexual abuse. Neglect. Perpetrators, again, please remember, could be both family members, a spouse, grandchild, grandson, and also a paired caregiver who's not ensuring that the elderly persons get the proper nutrition, they're not receiving proper medical care or any medical care at all, they're abandoned, they're literally just left alone for days, weeks, months, or longer with no connection or care from another human being. Elders who have mental health needs who are not getting any type of counseling or mental health support. Lack of hygiene support. Again, a lot of our elders have physical disabilities or infirmities that make it very difficult for them to wash or bathe, keep themselves clean and neat, and they need help to do that, and they're not getting it. And unsafe shelter is also a form of neglect. And those are just examples. I'm sure you can think of many ways in which an elder could be neglected. Substandard living conditions, unfortunately, is a problem a lot of seniors struggle with. And this could be, self-inflicted, for lack of a better term. But once this issue is brought to light, it needs to be addressed. And if it's not addressed by family members or paid caregivers, this is certainly a type of neglect. It could include hoarding. I know we use the term hoarding like we could even kid a friend about, oh, you're a hoarder or I'm a hoarder because my house is messy. Hoarding actually is a really severe mental illness, and it's very specific. It's not just having a messy or a dirty house. As you can see the couple in the photograph, their living room, which is where they're located, is literally unusable. There's garbage and just stuff and objects and mess going 5-6 feet tall up against the walls. There's no room to move or walk. This is extremely unsafe if a police officer, an EMT, or a firefighter needs to access the home. Often people die when such emergencies come about because rescuers can't get to them in time, or they're injured in falls or even being buried in their own objects. This can become incredibly unsanitary, as you could imagine, especially if people have pets or they don't have running water or working toilet facilities. If you've seen the show Hoarders on TV, you can get a good idea that this can actually destroy a house, right? Some of these houses actually have to be torn down. But what's the definition of hoarding? Well, I don't know if this is a technical definition, but it's really helpful in this work. So a person is hoarding if they have rooms in their house that can't be used for their intended use. So if you can't live or relax in the living room, you can't cook or wash dishes in the kitchen, you can't bathe or use the sink or toilet in the bathroom, you can't sleep safely in the bedroom because of this accumulation of stuff, that's a good way to define hoarding. This could also include an elderly person being forced to live in an unsafe facility, so say an assisted living or a nursing home that's structurally unsound or unsafe, or where there's hoarding conditions. Substandard living conditions can also include an elderly person having no access to the outdoors, either because of physical infirmity or structural problems. They can't even get outside to get a breath of fresh air or to sit out on their porch for a while. New York State, it's about to get very cold. It's already getting to be wintertime here, and we know how cold it can get. Not having heat can be incredibly difficult and even cause the death of an elderly person. No plumbing or maintenance issues. When elderly people who have physical disabilities or financial hardship start having issues in their home, like just disrepair, right? We all know how hard it can be to keep a home up, right? If they were, for example, to have some minor flooding and get mold, they can't get rid of the mold and it just spreads. If there's damage to the home, they can't get it fixed and it just gets worse and worse until it can become actually unsafe or unsound. So that's just some examples of substandard living conditions. Financial exploitation. This is a big one. I mean, we talk about financial abuse when we talked about intimate partner violence, but this gets really different when it comes to seniors, and we'll talk about why. So how much money and other financial assets do you think are stolen from seniors just in the United States every year? Just think of a number, just guess a number. Did you guess that much? It's over $3 billion every year. That's $3 billion worth of financial assets and actual money are stolen from seniors just in the US every single year. That is an absolutely extraordinary sum. If you think about it, children, we don't usually financially exploit them, right? Basically, our kids don't have a lot of money or financial assets to steal. And while financial abuse and control is certainly possible, and we know that's a very serious part of intimate partner violence, this gets even more serious for seniors because we could be talking about somebody's entire life savings, the only assets they have or ever will have until they die. So this is an extremely serious issue. Again, really got important to emphasize, perpetrators could be family members, sons, daughters, grandchildren, step-grandchildren, in-laws, spouses, also paid givers. Here's the new part. It can also include strangers, right? Strangers financially exploit elders to an absolutely incredible degree. Remember, most of our elders didn't grow up with the internet, right? That's kind of a new thing to them. Many of you have probably helped an elder try to figure out a cell phone or their remote control, and it's all just often weird and awkward for them because they didn't grow up with this stuff like most of us did, right? So they are very susceptible to financial scams from strangers, in addition to being ripped off by other people and their family and by caregivers. So what types of exploitation do seniors suffer from in the financial realm? Well, one is just outright theft, right? Just literally stealing objects from their home, their vehicles, jewelry, medication, anything of value in their home, and just literally taking it. Overcharging seniors. You know, as we get older, it gets hard for us to comparison shop. Again, a lot of these folks aren't using the internet and comparing shopping prices and what things should cost, especially when it comes to things like home repair or services, mowing, snow removal. So oftentimes seniors are charged 2, 3, 10 times or more than the going rate for something because they don't know what the average going rate is right now. Power of attorney or misuse of authority. This is something we haven't talked about this semester because it generally applies to older people. You get a power of attorney over someone. It means you can make decisions on their behalf, almost always related to the financial realm. So if I were to get a power of attorney from you, that gives me permission to deposit and take money from your bank account, take money from your pension, take money from your Social Security. It allows me to have access to the deed to your home. It's a very serious thing to give someone power of attorney because you give them a lot of authority over their life. And regardless of it being called a power of attorney, you don't have to be an attorney to be one, right? Anybody over 18 can be named as someone power of attorney. And be very careful who you give that authority to because they can make some very serious decisions. Those people are entrusted to do what's right by you. They're entrusted to take care of your money, to take care of your assets, and to make sure that you stay financially sound and are making sound investments and sound use of your money, and that all your bills are getting paid. And when these people abuse this authority, seniors can end up homeless and absolutely bankrupt. Forging signatures is another way to financially exploit an elder. You say, oh, I need you to sign this form so I can get copies of your medical records to your new doctor, and they're actually signing away, checks or bank statements or other financial documents, and they're not even sure what they're signing. And then financial scams, which I mentioned a minute ago. Phone and mail fraud, contractor scams. This is a big one where a contractor will approach an elder and say, oh, your driveway's a mess, but, you're a veteran and you seem like a nice guy, so I'm going to offer you a special deal. I'm only going to charge you $5,000 and I'll redo your whole driveway. It's really unsafe. You got to get this done. And the guy will say, oh, okay, sure, and writes him a check for $5,000, and they pour some black-looking goopy stuff on their driveway, and they leave, and no repair work is ever done, and their $5,000 is gone, and they don't even know how to contact this person or even how to report who did it. So contractor scams are a big one that are committed against elderlies. Obtaining social security numbers, driver's license, credit card info. Of course, we're all liable to be scammed, right? We all get the fake emails and, oh, your PayPal account's messed up. We need your account number, right? We're all subjected to this all the time. But again, those of us who grew up using the internet and computers and cell phones, we've gotten pretty wary of this stuff over the years, right? We've been taught to be very careful to not give our birth date or social security number to anyone unless we're darn sure we know who we're talking to. But this is an easy way to scam seniors out of information. The grandparent scam. I don't know if you've heard of this one. This is particularly egregious. This is where a young sounding person will call a grandparent and say, and how do you know they're grandparents? Well, we all Facebook, we all know who's who, and these days. You call someone you know is a grandparent, you say, hi, Grandma, it's me, I'm in trouble, I really need your help, I went with my friends to a party and I can't get home, I need you to send me money, I need you to give me your credit card number, right? And they actually make them think someone who they care about is in trouble or in some emergency need, and they steal their credit card information or cash from them. And of course, wrongfully influencing someone's last will and testament. Of course, it's perfectly okay if grandma asks, what would you like of mine to tell her something? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone basically moving in on an elderly person's life and saying, your kids don't care about you. They never come by and see you. None of your family cares about you. I'm the only person who cares about you. You should make me the executor of your estate. And then when that person dies, that scam artist gets everything. Their home, their assets, their furnishings, their jewelry, everything they have. These are just, of course, some forms of financial exploitation. There's as many types of financial exploitation as you can think of. These are just some of the common ones. So we've talked about physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, substandard living conditions, and financial exploitation. Now I want to move into two serious problems that we don't talk about nearly enough, in my opinion, that elders face, and it also can be related to elder abuse because it makes elders more vulnerable to abuse, and that is alcoholism and drug addiction. Alcoholism. You may or may not know that seniors have very high rates of binge drinking and what's called heavy drinking. So how do we define that? Binge drinking has been defined as having 4 to 5 drinks, alcoholic drinks, in a 2-hour period. So 4 to 5 drinks in a 2-hour period is generally considered binging. Of course, drinking more than that would also be binging. Heavy drinking is binge drinking 5 or more days a month. So 5 or more days a month, that senior is having 4 to 5 drinks in a 2-hour period. So of course, if you were drinking for 4 hours, that would be having 8 to 10 drinks in a 4-hour period, right? It's an awful lot of alcohol to consume. Well, why are our elders abusing alcohol? Well, probably for the same reasons a lot of people abuse alcohol. Loneliness is a huge problem a lot of our seniors face. Boredom. Oftentimes, these people have spent their whole lives working hard and being involved in sports and activities and social groups. You can imagine during the COVID pandemic how isolated we all felt. Well, a lot of seniors are isolated to that degree all the time, even when we're not under pandemic conditions. So boredom and loneliness are huge. Self-medicating, which refers to feeling physical pain or mental or emotional pain instead of getting medical or psychological help for it, just drinking to make all those feelings go away temporarily. Depression is a big issue faced by our seniors. Anxiety, end-of-life fears, loss of respect, all of those things that you can think about that would make somebody feel so down that they just want to escape how they feel, even if it's just for a little while, even just a couple hours. Alcoholism in seniors is a really important topic because alcohol affects elderly people much differently than it affects younger people. Older people have less body mass, so alcohol has a much stronger effect. So even those folks who grew up drinking and maybe grew up with a little heavy drinking, even those kind of experienced drinkers, alcohol is going to have a much stronger effect on them as they age. So because of their less body mass, alcohol has a much stronger effect. Alcohol also remains in their bodies longer. So while a 25-year-old person may be able to pound down a couple beers and 2 hours, 3 hours later, they're feeling pretty back to normal. That's not how it works when we're in our elder years. Alcohol remains in the body a lot longer, which also makes drinking a lot more dangerous. Alcohol, of course, can have adverse reactions to the numerous medications a lot of our elders are on. It can have an effect where it actually compounds the effect of the medication. So, for example, if a senior is on a high-dose painkiller, which is depressive to the nervous system, alcohol is also a depressive to the nervous system. So if you're taking a painkiller like an oxycodone or something like that, and then you drink on, they always say don't drink when you take those type of drugs. That's because it makes the effect of them even more powerful, and your central nervous system can become so depressed you just stop breathing, right? So it's very dangerous to mix certain drugs with medications. It can also be dangerous because it can lessen the effect of a medication. So a medication that's supposed to be helping you, like an antibiotic, those effects of those can be lessened if you're drinking. So whatever illness they're being treated for is not going to get better. Of course, it will increase problems associated with depression and dementia. Alcohol use also causes dehydration. If you've ever had one too many drinks and suffered a hangover, you know what alcohol-induced dehydration feels like. That headachy, sick stomach, run-down feeling is often caused by dehydration. That can be very dangerous for our elder seniors. And it also increases the symptoms of diabetes and high blood pressure and a lot of other ailments that elders suffer from. So excessive drinking isn't good for any of us, regardless of how old we are, but excessive drinking can have a really powerfully negative effect on seniors, even more so than the rest of us. It, of course, also makes you more vulnerable to different types of abuse, right? Whether it be physical abuse, it makes you more vulnerable to that. Certainly makes you more vulnerable to financial exploitation and those types of scams, right? Because your awareness is dulled, you're not really tracking things as well as you should be. And drug addiction. Here's a statistic I'd like you to remember. 40% of all seniors in the U.S. take 5 or more prescribed drugs every day. 40% take 5 or more. That is a lot of medication. Many of these drugs are opiates. We just discussed how abusing opiates can have very serious adverse effects, including death. Seniors can get easily confused and take too much medication. They forget to take their medication. This increases the rate of addiction because they're taking more and more medication. When I was a volunteer EMT, I was told that I would see elders who have unidentified medication. It's not in bottles. They have it in shoe boxes. They have it in baggies. They have it in cups. They have it in just piles. And oftentimes, if you ask a senior, what is this pill for? What is this red pill for? They'll say, I don't know. My doctor told me to take it. I don't know. I think it helps me sleep, or maybe it's for my blood pressure. They can get very easily confused about how much to take and what to take. And they also intentionally overuse drugs for the same reasons that they overuse and abuse alcohol, right? Depression, loneliness, feeling bored, anxious. So instead of taking one of the pills that makes you feel a little better, an elder may take 4 or 5, and we know what the effects of that can be. So I'm sure you've all heard about, what's commonly termed the opioid, crisis. And one of the ways many states, including New York, tried to deal with the opioid crisis as far as prescription opioids would be to prevent someone from going to a doctor and getting a script for an opioid like Oxycontin or oxycodone, and then going to another doctor and getting another script, and a third doctor for another script. So they've got 4, 5, 6 prescriptions by a bunch of different doctors, and they're using different pharmacies, and it makes it really hard to track just how much opioids any person is getting. So New York and a lot of other states created these systems where you can't do that anymore. So if you have an opioid prescription and you go to fill it at CVS, they can tell how many opiate prescriptions you've filled in the last month. So you can't get one at Rite Aid, one at Walgreens, right at CVS, and not have anybody know that that's what you're doing, right? And then they can refuse to refill the prescription. So that's good, right? That actually had a good intention of helping people not abuse prescription opioids, but it doesn't solve the problem of opioid addiction. And really startling ways, we've found that a lot of elders are now reverting to street drug use because they can't get that opioid prescription filled. So that drug that makes them feel better or forget about their problems or relieve their physical pain, they can't abuse it because they can't get any more of those prescriptions filled. So if they have 30 pills and it's supposed to last them a month, they can't get any more pills until the month is over. However, that doesn't help the problem of being addicted to opioids. And now we have elderly people on the street trying to obtain heroin and illegal scripts and illegal pills to get the same effect. And you can just imagine anybody is very vulnerable. Anybody. I don't care if you're 15 or 25. If you're buying street drugs, that's a very vulnerable position to be in, to be harmed, to be abused, to be taken advantage of, to be overdosed, right? To be sold something dangerous. Imagine how dangerous that is for a senior citizen. These people have no idea what they're getting into when they're on the street dealing with people who do not have the best intentions for these people, right? So what started as a good idea, which was to not allow people to obtain multiple prescriptions in any month, has actually had this unintended effect of having our elders out on the street trying to obtain these drugs illegally. And I don't need to tell you the dangers of that. Also, just one last note on opioids. We have a big problem of doctors still, even with all what we know about opioids now, are still over prescribing opioids. I can tell you that the last time I had dental surgery, the surgeon offered me a prescription for an opioid, and I said, I really don't want that. I'll take a script for like a high-powered Tylenol or something like that. I don't need a narcotic pain reliever. And they said, well, it is going to be really painful. You're going to wish you had something. And I said, okay, can you write me a script for 3 pills? Because I could take one when I leave here, and I could take one tomorrow morning and one tomorrow night, and that'll get me through the worst of the pain, and then I can take Tylenol, so not taking this narcotic. And they said, sure, we'll write you a script for 3 pills. When I went to fill it, they'd written me a script for 30 pills. So I asked for 3, and I got 30, right? So doctors are still way over prescribing the amount of opioids they give people. So that can make elderly people vulnerable to break-ins, right? Because people will break into their house to go through their drugs looking for these opioids, right? They will try to get elderly people to sell them to them, and if they can't get them to sell them to them, they'll just steal them, right? That puts an elderly person in a really vulnerable spot. So what do we do about it? How do we respond to elder abuse? Well, in New York State, we have adult protective services, just like we have child protective services. There is an adult protective service located in every county. So at any county you live in, including the boroughs in Manhattan, have an adult protective services unit. What do they provide to adults? Well, mental health services, they can either provide them directly or connect an elder person with mental health services that they need. They can advocate for them. They can call doctors and speak on their behalf and ask for help from other service providers to help an elderly person get what they need. They could talk to a facility manager or their nurse or their landlord about their living conditions. They can do all types of advocacy for them. They can get the housing they need, either repairing their housing or getting them into a housing facility that's more appropriate for their care. They also really importantly provide assistance in the home. You can imagine probably the number one fear of all elders who are living in their home is that someone is going to remove them from their home, put them in a nursing home, and they will never be able to live independently again. And that's a reasonable fear, right? I think we would all feel that way in that position. So sometimes adult protective services can get in-home services to allow an elderly person to stay in their own home as long as it's safe to do that by providing services in their house. That could include someone coming by every day, once a week, and making sure they're okay. That could also mean just installing a ramp, making it easier for them to move around, handrails in the bathroom, at the sink, the toilet, and the tub so they can get in and out of their bathroom easier. It could be something as simple as that. Helping them get proper medical care, helping the elders with financial services. There's a lot of really kind people in the financial industry. We don't get to hear too much about them in the news, but they exist, who volunteer to do elderly people's tax returns, to help them with their investments, to help them keep track of their checking account, to make sure their bills are getting paid, and most importantly, to make sure no one is ripping them off financially. So adult protective services can help put them in touch with these folks who can provide these financial services and financial protection for them. And of course, crisis intervention when crises come about. It's important to remember about adult protective services in New York State. They're not just for elderly people. These are for all adults. So this would be for anyone 18 or older. So anyone 18 and older in New York State can receive adult protective services. But generally speaking, the majority of their services are aimed at elders. Okay, but any adult in New York State can receive these services. This is just the website of the Albany County Adult Protective Services. Albany County calls it Protective Services for Adults. PSA, same thing, doesn't matter what they call it. You can look on these websites and see the different types of services they offer. And you can see right on the screen that these are for services for people 18 years or older. Okay. Here's the one for Rensselaer County. They also call it Protective Services for Adults. Other counties call it Adult Protective Services. No matter, it's all the same thing. And they again point out on their website that these services are for people 18 years or older. Okay. It's also interesting. They say also point out it's for people who have unmet essential needs for food, clothing, or shelter, or they are at risk of harm due to abuse, neglect, or exploitation. They have that right on their website. So every county has it. Just wanted to show you what the websites for Albany and Rensselaer look like. Why is it difficult to help seniors? Well, it's a lot harder to help a senior than it is to help a kid. I can tell you that for sure. So in the United States, every adult has certain rights. And by rights, I mean constitutional rights. Whether you are 18 or 21, you have certain rights in this country. Children do not have such rights, okay? So while the government is permitted to take extensive action to protect children, the government does not have the same ability to take action to protect an adult. For example, police officers in New York State are one of the very few groups of people who can put in a child take emergency custody of a child. A police officer can physically take a child out of a home and put them in protective custody. What it usually means is they contact CPS and then it goes that route. But right in that moment, a police officer sees a child cannot remain where they are. A police officer has the authority in New York State to temporarily take them into their custody and get them the immediate help they need. That doesn't apply to elders. That doesn't apply to adults, right? So when you have rights in this country, you largely have rights to live how you want. And as long as you're not hurting someone else, you can generally get away with it. So if you live in a house as an adult that's substandard or a bit unsafe or messy or you're hoarding in it, there's not a whole lot the government can do outside of code enforcement, which really just gets somebody kicked out of their house. So we can't force people, we can't force the adults in our state or in our country to get the help they need the way we can force children to and the way we can enforce the parents of those children to. It is much more difficult to help an adult. If you wanted to actually have an adult removed from their home and placed in a facility, that is an extremely long and complex process. I know a lot of elders feel like a family member could just throw them into their home and take all their assets. That is actually a very difficult thing to do legally. It's called an Article 81 proceeding, and it is very lengthy. And courts are not inclined to take away people's rights. Right? They're not inclined to say, oh, yeah, just take her out of her house and throw her in that assisted living facility because she has dementia. It doesn't work that way. It is a very complex and lengthy process involving physicians and the courts and attorneys and mental health workers. So it is much harder to help a senior than it is to help a child. So 5 theories of elder abuse. You're going to cover this information in your textbook this week more in depth, but I'll just cover it real briefly here. And again, this should sound familiar. This is good prep for the final exam. One theory of why elder abuse occurs is the intergenerational transmission of violence theory. The book doesn't give this one a whole lot of weight. It actually, I think, downplays it quite a bit. But it's just a theory that those people who are abused as children and adults will abuse other people, including senior citizens. This goes back to what we called the cycle of violence. Psychopathology, you'll remember this from our study of intimate partner violence. This is the theory that people who abuse elder themselves have a mental disorder that causes them to be violent against others. That's the theory behind psychopathology. Social exchange theory, we also covered this in terms of intimate partner violence. This is the idea that if anybody in the relationship has all the power, they're very likely to abuse it. So if an elder person becomes helpless and entirely dependent on a caregiver, that caregiver, whether it's a family member or a paid caregiver, is going to have all the authority and all the power, all the access to money, to food, to transportation, to healthcare, and most importantly, they can isolate the elder from all the sources of support, just the way abusers do in intimate partner violence. So social exchange theory says when a relationship gets so imbalanced that one person has all of the power, they are likely to abuse that power and abuse and neglect the elder person in their care. Family stress theory. I underline this. This is important to remember. Your text and other researchers identifies this as the most widely accepted theory of why elder abuse occurs. And that's because caring for an elderly person can be extremely stressful. It can be extremely difficult. An elder who has dementia, mental health problems, addiction issues, serious medical issues, all of these things combined can be extremely hard for someone to deal with. And it doesn't mean they don't have the best of intentions. They may care about this person and want to care for them, but it's too overwhelming. They simply do not have the emotional or physical skills to take care of a person who has this level of need. Financial burdens, of course, can be overwhelming and very stressful. And all this stress leads to the caregiver abusing the elder. Now, note, this is not to take away responsibility from someone who's abusive. We are not saying that this is okay or acceptable. or even that we understand. It's just a theory, okay? So that it can be so stressful to care for an elder that people will lash out and abuse or neglect that elder. Neutralization theory, this actually came about to explain juvenile delinquency. The basis of this theory is it's related to how people neutralize their actions by not taking responsibility for what they do, right? And juveniles are kind of famous for this, right? Most teenagers are kind of follow this pattern of, I didn't do my homework because you took my computer. Or I was late for curfew because my friend wanted to stay at the other friend's house and he was the one who had the car, right? They're always blaming everybody else for their misdeeds, right? And that goes really far in explaining juvenile delinquency. It's also used to explain elder abuse, right? Where abusers refuse to accept responsibility for what they're doing to that elderly person. They either deny the abuse or neglect is occurring at all, or they blame family members, other family members for doing the abuse, or they blame facility staff or other service providers for the abuse that they themselves are causing. That's neutralization theory. So now we have a few theories. So this goes back to why it's so hard to help an elder in New York. New York State is the only state in the United States that does not have mandated reporting of elder abuse. I'm going to say that again because it's really upsetting. New York State is the only state in the United States that does not have mandated reporting of elder abuse. For example, if an LPN is being paid to provide medical care and other services for an elder in their home, and they see or know, or the elder tells them that a family member is physically abusing them or sexually or verbally abusing them, that LPN or RN or any other type of caretaker is not required to call Adult Protective Services or anyone else to report that abuse. Interestingly enough, bankers who really should be mandated reporters and other financial folks are not required to report abuse. So let's say you work at CEFCU or another bank and you're familiar with an elderly person because they've come in and done their banking with you for years, and you notice somebody who looks maybe a little sketchy. You're not too sure about them. They have signed documents, but just something seems suspicious to you, and you see that elder's bank account going down and down and down, or you notice suspicious charges on a charge account or anything like that, you're not required to report it to Adult Protective Services or anyone else. And family members are not required to report on other family members, right? So there's no mandated reporting. So bankers, nurses, doctors, police officers, all those people who we require to report child abuse, well, not bankers, but you know what I mean, police officers, doctors, dentists, psychologists, mental health care workers, teachers, that whole list of mandated reporters, we don't have that for elders. That doesn't exist. So what happens if one of those people tries to help an elder? Well, let's say a doctor is trying to help an elderly person and the elderly person confides in their doctor that someone's abusing them. That could be a violation of HIPAA for them to report it, right? We get around HIPAA for child abuse because we have mandated reporters. So this is just a really concerning thing that in the entire United States, New York State's still the only one who doesn't have mandated reporting of child abuse. And I want you to think about that because that's actually the topic of this week's extra credit. So spend a minute thinking about that this week so you can answer the extra credit post. That's the end of our lecture. You do have a textbook assignment this week. You'll see the exact pages in the module. I'm going to ask you to look at a couple websites. You don't have a particular assignment here. I just want you to go in and cruise around the website, click around, open different things, see what's on there, whether you're doing research, whether you're studying elder abuse, you need facts about elder abuse, you're trying to help an elder, you will see things on these websites that are helpful. The New York State Attorney General is very dedicated to helping senior citizens, especially in relation to not getting abused in a facility and to not being the victim of a financial scam. But as we talked about, how many of our elders, especially our elderly elders, are cruising around websites, right? So it's really important for us to look at those websites and to see that information and to get that information to the elders in our lives so they're not victims of these types of scams. You do have a quiz this week. It's just on elder abuse, one topic quiz. Note that's quiz number 7. We only have 8 quizzes in the whole semester, so there is only one quiz after this. That quiz will be coming up shortly, but quiz number 7 this week, you're almost done with your quizzes. As I said, there's a discussion board opportunity, and I bet you will be very happy to see there is no project this week. As always, if you have any questions, if there's anything I can do, you need assistance, please let me know. Have a good week.